Open the straits, you crazy. This is a president of the United States. This is just murder before our eyes by a deranged old man and an absolutely vicious war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu.
With arguably the strongest military and the greatest intelligence, how does a country make such a colossal miscalculation?
It's also got the stupidest president in the world. And he's going to kill a lot of people tomorrow on his whim. Why can't a world leader say, it's really not right for you, Mr. Trump, to say you're going to return Iran to the Stone Age?
You think they're waiting it out, that there's just 2 or 3 more years to go and then Donald Trump will be out?
I'll tell you, the Middle East will not last 3 years. I don't know if it'll last 3 months.
You don't usually hear language like this from a man who has spent decades advising governments, shaping global policy, and sitting at the heart of power. Jeffrey Sachs is not a fringe voice. He's one of the world's most influential economists, an advisor to the United Nations, a professor at Columbia University, and a man who has worked inside the machinery of global decision-making. Which is precisely why his words now land differently. At a moment when the war in Iran appears to have reached a dangerous stalemate, Professor Sachs is not offering the usual calibrated diplomatic language. He's openly frustrated. He's blunt and he's naming names. Because when a system reaches a dead end, it's often the people who know it best who can tell you why. Hello, Professor Sachs. It's good to have you on the show again.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
Professor, who do you think is winning the war right now?
Well, everybody is losing because this is a disaster for the whole world. But the United States and Israel failed to achieve their objectives of overthrowing the government of Iran or making Iran surrender. So in this sense, Iran is holding its own, and it's showing that it has the capacity to retaliate, to have deterrence. But it's a tragedy for everybody. I don't think it's a game of win and lose. It's just a disaster that is completely unnecessary.
Professor, but I'm wondering, with arguably the strongest military and the greatest intelligence, how does a country make such a colossal miscalculation?
Well, first of all, it's also got the stupidest president in the world. So this is part of the story. The man's an idiot. He's a fool. He is so full of himself that he listens to nobody else. So you could have the strongest military and the greatest intelligence operation, but if you don't listen to anybody, then you can do the stupidest things imaginable. And Trump is a fool. Netanyahu is the worst war criminal in the world. He has gone to war everywhere, from Libya and Sudan to Gaza and the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Iran, all in pursuit of his mad delusion of Israel being the regional hegemonic power. So you have 2 people here at the head of this that are just disaster cases. I think they're really mentally ill, frankly, because they're so psychopathic that they don't count lives, they don't count disasters, they don't factor in the consequences of what they're doing. So you should use your military when it's needed and not use it when it's not needed.
Professor, I can sense your frustration. Do you think that's something the rest of the Americans also relate to?
In general, around maybe a quarter of Americans support Trump in this. Most Americans are strongly opposed. The frustration is very, very high because most of us think that the people around Trump and Trump himself are idiots. And we don't like to see our country governed by idiots. And I'm using language advisedly because, frankly, Trump is saying he's going to mass murder Iranians in the next day. He's going to destroy a cultural heritage that dates back thousands of years. He's going to do it on a whim and on complete ignorance. Netanyahu's going to do it on a lifetime built of hatred. Netanyahu hates everybody except maybe his fellow Israeli citizens, but he hates the Palestinians. He hates anyone that supports the Palestinians. He hates the Iranians. So he's a man of hate. So between the two of them, people are disgusted. The American people they're abandoning Israel as fast as they can. There is a plurality that supports Palestine now. This is the first time in history, because traditionally the American people supported Israel, but that's gone. People are horrified by what's happening.
I want to speak about the Israeli Prime Minister as well as the American president in detail. But before we go to that, I want to talk about the American society psyche at the moment. Like you mentioned, that a lot of people are pouring out in support of Palestinians. But there is also a very strong pro Israel lobby in America. How are they seeing the war?
Well, the lobby is a political force, but not a dominant opinion in the United States. So there's a lot of money, big money, that pays for candidates that support Israel. There is one group in the United States, more numerous than Jews, who are divided about Israel, that vote for Trump, and that's what we call the Christian evangelicals or Christian Zionists. These are people who have very peculiar beliefs, by the way, about the end of the world. And they believe that the events that are taking place in Israel are shaping the end of the world. Well, surprisingly, because America's really a strange country, they constitute maybe 15 or 20% of the American population. Not dominant by any means, but big enough that they have an influence. And you can see them if you go online to see the prayers taking place in the White House and the people saying that God has sent Trump. And it's very weird. You wouldn't even believe it, but it's actually happening in the White House. And this is part of the story, whether Trump is using this or whether he really believes that he's sent by God on this mission. Who knows with this guy? You can't know. But it's so strange. We've never had anything like this in the American government before.
You think there's a possibility he genuinely believes that God sent him?
Of course, he says so. And he's definitely a mentally ill person. Psychiatrists that are specialists in forensic psychiatry call him a psychopath. They call him a narcissist. They call him paranoid. They call him a megalomaniac. They have lots of clinical terms. But what they mean is that this guy is full of himself to a delusional extent. He doesn't care about anybody else. He cares about only himself. And he could believe, yes, he's God's agent. Netanyahu behaves in a similar way. We're in the hands of really two very mentally unstable people. This is not how things are talked about in political circles. Oh, yes, Israel has its reasons and so on. This is the most bizarre, unnecessary, vicious, murderous war imaginable. It's even worse than the Iraq war in 2003, which was a phony war, also spurred by Netanyahu. This time, they don't even give excuses. Well, they do give excuses. Last time, they said it was weapons of mass destruction. That was just a made-up argument. This time, Trump, just like an idiot, honestly, says, oh, I'm stopping them from having nuclear weapons. They didn't want nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons was ruled against the religion by the supreme leader that they murdered. The Iranians had put themselves under UN supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency in 2015 in a UN Security Council-backed agreement called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and Trump ripped it up in 2018. So what do they want? What the U.S. and Israel want is to overthrow the Iranian government and to put in a puppet regime. Well, this is really kind of a mind-boggling idea. Maybe they thought it was easy. Maybe they thought you just kill a few dozen people and it all happens magically. But instead, they push the whole world into a war.
Professor, you said that you're choosing your words with advice. I want to ask you, who is advising US president when he says something on the lines of, and I'm quoting rather, there will be nothing like it, open, a word I can't say on air, the straight, you crazy you'll be living in hell.
Yeah. Could I say it, by the way, because it's important that people hear?
Please go ahead. I
Yeah.
don't have the discretion.
Yeah. He says, open the straits, you crazy. This is a president of the United States. This is not normal. This is not even a threat. This is a kind of insanity. That's my point. That's the point I've been making for quite a while. This is a clinical issue. We've never had a president of the United States ever in our history, 250 years, speak like Donald Trump wrote yesterday, because he is a sick man. And of course, nobody wants to say it. Just like the emperor with no clothes. Everyone wants to say, oh, Donald's my friend. I don't know, maybe Prime Minister Modi would still say, Donald's my friend. But he's not a friend of anybody. He's not a friend of India. He's not a friend of anybody. This is a sick man. And he has in control the most powerful military in the world. And he's going to kill a lot of people tomorrow on his whim. And this is taken as normal. And our newspapers and our Congress stands back just asking, oh, what do you think he will do? How many people will he kill? Will he follow through? Not, how do we stop this madness? Because this is madness. I know that the Iranians did not want a nuclear weapon and they wanted to negotiate. I know that because they called me repeatedly. Mr. Sachs, do you know anyone in the White House? Do you know anyone we can talk to? Because I hang out at the United Nations, because I've met the president of Iran on 2 occasions. And he spent both hours just talking about peace. And I had to feel so sad. What a nice man, a heart surgeon who doesn't understand the contemptible president of the United States, who's going to take any words of a nice heart surgeon and say, I think I'll kill you. And that's how they're behaving right now. And why can't world leaders say something about this before it's too late? That's what makes me especially upset. Look, I'm a professor. Why can't a world leader say, it's really not right for you, Mr. Trump, to say you're going to return Iran to the Stone Age? It's really not right, Mr. Trump, to say, open the strait. It's really not right, Mr. Trump, to say you will destroy every bridge and power plant in Iran. Why does everyone hold back? Why do our newspapers say, oh, I wonder what Donald Trump is going to do next? It's time, actually, for this not to happen. This is a kind of insanity. This is not politics by other means. This is just murder before our eyes by a deranged old man and an absolutely vicious war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu, who, by the way, Prime Minister Modi met the week before this started, after Israel had committed a genocide in Gaza. But we're just not supposed to say these things, you know? We're supposed to have genocide in polite company. But 100,000 people were killed, mainly women and children. The whole city of Gaza, which goes back thousands of years, was leveled to the ground, was turned into rubble before our eyes. And that's normal. We can't normalize mass murder in our world. And that's what we're doing. That's why I'm really asking some leaders to do something.
I understand where you're coming from. I also understand because we've had this chat over the course of the past 1 year of Trump being, more than 1 year of Trump being in office. And I understand your frustration because since the beginning, since the day he was elected, rather re-elected, you've been warning that he's going to take America to war. But then, there is one conversation that a lot of us are constantly going back to in the middle of this war, is that the truth is that majority of Americans have elected this president, not once, twice. And many are now arguing that maybe Americans deserve this because they should have known what was coming.
Well, first of all, India doesn't deserve it. Iran doesn't deserve it. The Gulf countries don't deserve it. Nobody deserves Trump outside of America. And within America, it's not true that a majority of Americans elected Trump. It's true that he had of roughly half the country that voted, because they don't really enable poor people to vote. They go out of their way to make sure that the turnout in the United States is low. Well, slightly more than half voted for Trump. I don't know what the exact number is, but of all eligible voters, probably 27 or 28%, because it's something like half of those who are eligible to vote voted, and about half of those voted for Trump. So he's had support of, at the beginning, about 40% of the American adult population. Now it's down to maybe 33% of the American adult population. His disapproval rating is over 60%. We have a system on paper called the U.S. Constitution, which means that we don't elect a monarch or a despot. We have a system based on the checks and balances of three branches of government. But one of them is dead: Congress. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't take any responsibility, even though under our Constitution, Congress has the responsibility, and by the way, the sole responsibility, for tariffs. That's last year's business. And for war. That's the immediate business. Actually, it's not a majority that voted for Trump. We have rather low turnouts. In the United States, the turnout in 2024 was a little bit over 60% of the eligible voters, and about half of those voted for Trump. It turns out that he was supported by about 32% of all eligible voters, so nothing like a majority. And when you look at his approval ratings, they started roughly around 40% approval and around 50% disapproval. Today, they are at about 33 to 35% approval and roughly 60% disapproval. This is an unpopular person, but our legislative body, our Congress, which is supposed to represent the people, barely exists anymore. And you'll recall when we talked last year, and I said all the time, what Trump was doing with tariffs was illegal. It was clear. It was unconstitutional. I said so from the beginning. He turned over the whole world. He's a maniac.
Professor, in the last address that President Trump made, he said something in passing that the entire country of Iran can be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night. Keeping in mind that the president has constantly contradicted himself, how much merit do you think there is in his Tuesday deadline?
I think that it's likely that there will be heavy bombing tomorrow. I don't think that it's true that he can take out Iran in one night. Uh, he could commit mass murder tomorrow. That's possible. He could commit unprecedented war crimes. That's possible. But I don't think that he can take out Iran. And I think that Iran, if uh, struck in this way, will retaliate very harshly against Israel and against U.S. targets in the region and against uh, military and energy targets in the Middle East. I think we're in for a disaster, is what I think. And I think it's likely that this disaster actually goes forward at this point.
Also, one obvious question that I'm wondering, and I think many of the Americans might be wondering as well, is if President Trump says every single day that Iran's military, nuclear infrastructure, and its regime has been quote unquote decimated, why is this war still on?
Well, it hasn't been decimated. So the question is, why does Trump say it? And that
Hmm.
is partly the normal bluster and lying of the US government, but it's also his individual mental condition. Watch whatever Trump says about anything. It's always the biggest, the best, the most historic, the greatest event in the history of the world by the greatest genius. People thought that was cute or clever. Uh, it's actually a very deep mental infirmity. He is a narcissist and a megalomaniac. Uh, he is living in a delusional world, surrounded by people who tell him how wonderful he is. At the press conference today, uh, we had a kind of display that I don't recall of abasement by American officials abasing themselves to the president. Uh, the CIA director said, "Oh, it's such an honor. It's such a wonderful life honor to serve the greatest president." And Hegseth, who's really a piece of work, a man who should be, I don't even think he could hold a responsible job, period, much less Secretary of War, so called, uh, also abasing himself with the greatness of the president. And then preachers telling the president that God sent you. Uh, this is real. This is happening right now. That's not me saying it. That's really happening. There were preachers yesterday, in Easter Day, in the White House, in prayer, saying that God has sent Donald Trump to victory. Wow.
I don't know how to react to that because you're right, we've never seen a president like that. And speaking of these men in uniform and otherwise, last time you and I talked, you had said that Israel will try to force the US to go to war with Iran. But this is not just the prime minister of Israel's doing, right? There are men in Washington, D.C., who genuinely think in their right minds that Iran is an imminent threat.
I don't know if there are more than two, uh, Trump and Hegseth. Of course, there are some of these uh, Christian Zionists who think the world's coming to an end and are delighted by that fact. But in terms of people within the US government, it's surprising. I'm looking, honestly, looking hard. Uh, I can't find any report of any name of anybody in the executive branch that has supported this other than Trump and Hegseth. Joe Cantu was uh, the head of counterintelligence, resigned in protest. Tulsi Gabbard, who is the director of national intelligence, is implicitly against this, both by her testimony and by Trump's statements. Well, we don't quite see eye to eye. A number of generals have been fired in recent days. Again, rather alarming, given that Hegseth is a crude, absolutely unequipped person for any of this, but he's firing generals, and we can only surmise, because we're not told, that the generals are opposing what's happening, and so he's firing them. So honestly, aside from, we have we have one senator who is the most detestable person next to Trump in Washington, Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham.
There isn't a war that this guy hasn't supported. He's really, again, I can't use the language Trump's language might be appropriate, but he's the only one really cheerleading. The rest of the Senate is actually quiet. They're murmuring. They're pathetic, by the way, because they have a job to do. They have a constitutional oath, which they don't live up to. But they're not cheerleading. This isn't a case where the Israel lobby is working its magic in the Senate so that senator after senator is saying, we must do this because Iran is such a great threat to the world. It's not that case right now. This is a two-man show, Trump and Hegseth, and you can hardly find another name. I don't know, we have Radcliffe, who abased himself. We have General Kane, who's the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But the rumors were that Kane warned Trump against the likely failure of this. We don't know, but that's the rumor.
Let me ask you this then, Professor. Since we're already in the second month of this war, do you think Washington and Tel Aviv are aligned in their goals in Iran? And if not, does that complicate the off-ramp to end this war?
They're aligned. They both want to kill as many Iranians as possible and to bring Iran under the complete subjugation of Israel and the United States. They want to install a puppet regime. So they're aligned.
But as things stand right now, don't you think Donald Trump genuinely wants to end the war? And
No.
Benjamin Netanyahu, you don't?
No, what Donald Trump wants, of course he wants to end the war. And to use his favorite expression, he wants the supreme leader of Iran to come kiss his. That's, again, quoting Donald Trump, what he said about the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, saying, he didn't think he'd be kissing my. Honestly, this is a president of the United States. I'm trying to tell the world something. Pay attention. World, please. This is not normal. And grown-ups, and I count Prime Minister Modi, I count President Putin, I count President Xi Jinping as grown-ups, need to have a talk with this person. Really have a talk. And I mean now, before the world's blown up. Yeah, he would listen to the three of them because they're big boys for him. He's like a junior high schooler who has to be in the in-group. So these are three leaders of superpowers, and yes, he would listen to them. Probably only to them.
Do you think any of them have been approached to mediate between the two?
I don't know. I don't think that they've done it together, and I think they should. That is the BRICS, and I think this is what should be done. Trump craves approval. He can't dismiss Prime Minister Modi, just who are you, head of a superpower with 1.5 billion people. He can't just dismiss President Xi. He's supposed to be going there in a couple weeks. He can't just dismiss President Putin, who he knows is formidable and leading a formidable country. So the three of them could probably sit down and say, Donald, take a seat. calm down, take a deep breath, have some tea, here's a cookie. You don't have to destroy Iran. And here's why it's not good for you. And we'll stay with you. We'll have a nice afternoon together. It'll be wonderful. The four leaders, we could play bridge, we could do all sorts of things. Donald, let's have a nice afternoon together. You don't have to destroy Iran. This is what I think is really needed.
The daddy and the child analogy has completely turned on its head there.
Well, the
But,
guy behaves like a 3-year-old. He's impulsive. He's violent. He is remorseless. I think 3-year-olds generally behave better, but they don't have a lot of self-control necessarily. And this is Donald Trump's mentality. And many psychologists have pointed out the man had a very difficult childhood. He had a very cruel and domineering father. He's nursed an insecurity all his life. And it became this kind of malignant narcissism.
Professor, what do you make of Iran's strategy in the war so far?
Well, they're seeing bombs coming in over their heads. They're very nice people. I meet with the Iranian diplomats all the time. They want peace. They're horrified by what's happening to their country. But they're also understanding that they're facing a maniac. They know that. They are going to defend themselves. But I don't think that they are very happy about this at all. And I met with them for the last 2 years, and they wanted to negotiate. And, it's strange because the demonization of Iran is pervasive in the Western media, but not too many Westerners actually know and meet Iranian diplomats and leaders and so forth. I do because of my work at the UN. They're very dignified, soft-spoken, looking for negotiation, trying to say, well, will this work? I was absolutely horrified last summer, of course, when in the midst of negotiations, Israel and the United States bombed them and started the war. But then they said, okay, we're going to try again. I said, are you kidding? Do you understand how mentally vicious Netanyahu and Trump are? And be careful because, I'm all for diplomacy. I preach it every single day. But I'm not for getting killed in the middle of negotiations by the other side. And this time, of course, was even worse. The presumption is that the reason the supreme leader, Khamenei, and so many government officials were together is that they had made progress in the negotiations. The Omani negotiator had said there's a lot of progress, some significant concessions by the Iranians. We'll meet in Vienna the coming week. And reportedly, they were meeting together to discuss how to proceed on the negotiations. And Mossad, which is a murder machine, said, oh, they're all together, let's kill them all. And Trump said, yeah, that's a splendid idea, let's kill them all. And that's why the strike occurred at that moment.
Because Iran has already rejected at least 2 US proposals that we know of at least. Do you think Iran is negotiating from a point of strength?
Well, these aren't negotiations. These are demands, unilateral demands by the United States. Surrender. That's all they are. So the U.S. isn't negotiating. What has the U.S. said about Iran's security? What has the U.S. said about its military bases attacking Iran? What has the U.S. said about Israel, the worst rogue nation in the whole world, which dreams of overthrowing Iran and casting plagues on Iran? Nothing. The U.S. says nothing except here are our demands. And if you don't meet our demands, we send you back to the Stone Age. That's not negotiations. That's pure thuggery.
And what does Iran want right now?
Iran wants a peace and not to be attacked again, not to be killed again. And it doesn't quite know how to get that because it's got two psychopaths on its trail. And one of them is the President of the United States.
Professor, you were quite angry about the fact that why aren't world leaders speaking up? But
Yes.
world leaders, especially NATO leaders,
Well,
and
NATO. I give up on NATO. Look, if you have a U.S. military base, you're not a sovereign country. This is a basic proposition. These are occupied countries. Why the hell would France, or even less than France's special case, why would Germany have U.S. military bases 80 years after the end of World War II? 80 years. Why would Japan have U.S. military bases 80 years after the end of World War II? And this is true all over these NATO countries. The U.S. controls these countries. These are not independent countries. They barely can make a coherent sentence, unfortunately. All they say at the UN is attacking Iran. They don't even say that Iran has been attacked. It's very predictable to keep the scorecard at a UN Security Council session. If the country hosts a U.S. military base, it says Iran is an aggressor. It's like turning the world upside down because they just absolutely cannot say the truth about the country that occupies them. This is why I've said to India all along, for heaven's sake, don't join the Quad. Are you kidding? India had enough of colonial rule. Don't become part of America's empire. It's a big mistake. But these countries are part of America's empire for the last 80 years, so they don't even think straight. They don't even know what it means to think independently. The only one that's made any sense at all is the president of Spain, President Pedro Sanchez, who said, I'm not getting involved in this war. And then Trump said, we eliminate Spain from the map. I don't remember exactly how he put it. But you see, the American mindset in general in Washington is we control everything. And then the Trump mindset puts that into a delusional degree that I control everything and nobody talks back to me and I punish whoever I want. That's what you get into. So all of these countries are afraid to say a word. They're just afraid. And it's amazing to me how afraid they are, but they are. And then when I talked to the Gulf country leaders last fall, and I said, you're really at terrible risk. And why are you signing on with Israel? And one of them said to me, oh, but Mr. Sachs, we've been promised NVIDIA chips. We've been promised data centers. This is honestly how this works. It's unbelievable. And now they're getting bombed like hell for their NVIDIA chips and their data centers. People have to grow up and understand that we're not going to hold on to the world if we behave this way.
Professor, I'm very aware of your frustration with NATO. What I wanted to ask is
Yeah,
that
sure.
that's all right. I wanted to ask is that I understand that Europe and NATO countries especially have for the longest time become yes men to the Americans. But the fact that they have categorically refused to join Trump's war, if I can put it that way, in the Middle East, don't you think that's a start where they start to take a stand for themselves?
Trump says, oh, NATO, we should end NATO. And God, I hope he does for the sake of everybody. This would be the best thing possible for Europe. It would finally grow up. It would have its independence. It could be sovereign again. We could celebrate that the colonial era is over for Europe. And we could celebrate the independence of these countries. This would be a great thing. He won't follow through, though. The reason he won't follow through is that NATO is not a favor to Europe. NATO is a favor to the United States. It's the way that the United States runs its empire. So Trump would be told, no way. We're not giving up all of this control over 450 million people, and he wouldn't. But I hope it happens.
Do you think Trump might see Europe's betrayal in the Middle East as a reason to take revenge on the Ukraine war?
I hope so, because the war between Ukraine and Russia should end by Europe stopping to support Ukraine, the United States stopping to support Ukraine, and Ukraine saying, okay, we'll be neutral. Because the whole war in Ukraine was a crazy war, just like this one, because the United States would not listen to Russia for 30 years when it said, don't put your damn military on our border. And the United States said, who the hell are you to tell us where to put our military bases? And so we ended up in a war. And Ukraine was so naive, so inexperienced in statehood that they could not understand the disaster the U.S. was leading them into. So if the U.S. and Europe, yeah.
Professor, just so I'm hearing it right, you're saying that you are hoping that the United States will retract its support for Ukraine.
Yes, because what's the support? To get Ukrainians killed by the millions. There's no support here. This is a
But then
disaster.
won't Ukraine collapse?
No, Ukraine should just declare that it's neutral and it won't collapse at all. Russia does not want to own Ukraine. It does not want to own Ukraine. It does not want the American military on Ukrainian soil. That's why this war came from the beginning, because of NATO enlargement against the promise that the United States and Germany made to the Soviet Union in February 1990 that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. And as usual, the United States cheated because it is the empire of our world today. And it said, we'll put NATO wherever we want. And when the Ukrainian government in 2014 said, we don't want NATO, we want neutrality, it's not prudent to join NATO, we're next to Russia, the United States helped to overthrow that government. That's called a color revolution. It's known as the Maidan. The United States has its fingerprints all over that overthrow of Yanukovych. This is a war that was designed by the United States back in the 1990s. Actually, they didn't think it would be a war, just like in Iran, where they thought Iran would surrender in one day. They thought Russia would never resist if Ukraine joins NATO. They miscalculated as usual. They thought, what can Russia do? We're going to move to Ukraine. It's none of Russia's damn business. I know. I spoke to the American policymakers. They're, by the way, I've been doing this for more than 40 years. These people are not smart. This is something hard to maybe understand. They're not smart. They don't know what they're doing. I spoke to the senior Security Council official in December 2021, said to him, why don't you tell President Putin that NATO's not going to enlarge? And he said, oh, Jeffrey, NATO's not going to enlarge to Ukraine. I said, you're telling me that? Why don't you say it out loud? And he says, no, we can't say it out loud. We have an open door policy. I said, you're going to have a war for something that's not actually going to happen? And he said to me, oh, Jeffrey, there's not going to be a war. We're going to handle this diplomatically. That was December 2021. Where does this genius, what does he do now? He teaches at Harvard. I'm telling you, you can't make this up. Honestly, we're not well led. That's why there are too many wars. Because people don't think. They don't listen. They don't understand. They don't respect the other side. They don't negotiate. And the Americans are the worst at it because they think they run everything. So I'm sorry, this is a mindset issue. And you might think, oh, these clever people, they must be so well advised. They must know what they're doing. It's puzzling. Why didn't they think of that? Because they're not smart, they don't calculate, and they don't listen, and they have no respect for anybody else. And so that's a fundamental problem. We say pride goeth before the fall. Well, there is more arrogance in the American government than can be imagined. Everything's the greatest. Everything's the most powerful. Everything is under Donald Trump's personal command. He's going to destroy everything in Iran tomorrow, and he may try. But that's why nothing makes sense, because they are so arrogant, they can't stop. And don't play into the arrogance is what I just plead with other leaders. If the emperor really has no clothes, don't tell him all the time how beautiful his clothes are, because it just continues the insanity of it. And if it were just insanity, okay, but it's not. We're about to have thousands and thousands of people killed, probably tomorrow, because of this insanity. And because nobody has stood up and said clearly, you can't do this.
Professor, say the war in the Middle East ends tomorrow. What kind of Iran is it going to leave behind?
Well, it would leave behind an Iran that is damaged, that is aware that it is the heir of a 5,000-year civilization that did not capitulate to a madman. It is an Iran that may say that it's time to get nuclear weapons, because this is a completely crazy world with Israel on the loose, with America abetting every Israeli war and so forth. Who knows? It depends how it ends. If it ends with the United States and Israel stopping their attacks, that's one thing. If it ends the best way, with the grown-ups telling everyone, children, go sit down and stop this. This is breaking everything in the house. Then it can end in a better way.
Do you think an open door policy can be established with Iran, where there can always be a threat of another war coming?
Somebody has to tell Israel the truth. And the truth is, you have to go back to your borders, which are the borders of the 4th of June, 1967. There's going to be a state of Palestine next door. You're not going to attack it anymore. You're not going to attack Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Iran. You're not. You're just going to live within your own borders and stop messing up the whole region and threatening the whole world. Someone has to give that speech to Israel. And again, Trump is not going to be the one to give that speech. He couldn't even say that coherently. The United States probably isn't the one to give that speech. But I think the other major powers need to give that speech. Britain, I have no hope for. They created the mess like usual with the Balfour Declaration and everything else. This is British colonial legacy, the way everything has gone. But even France could show responsibility. India, Russia, China, Brazil, the rest of the BRICS, African Union, many countries could show responsibility. Again, what is the case is that nobody wants to stick their neck out, you know? Nobody wants to say a word. No one even wants to say the truth. If the truth means that Donald might be a little bit upset, no one wants to do that.
You think they're waiting it out, that there's just 2 or 3 more years to go and then Donald Trump will be out?
I'll tell you, the Middle East will not last 3 years. I don't know if it'll last 3 months. I really don't. The amount of destruction that could come in the next 3 days by itself could be remarkable. So there's no luxury of waiting it out 3 years.
Professor, you've called the American president stupid, Israel a rogue state, and Iran the nice people. You're a unique voice coming out of America, and I hope you're not branded an Iranian agent of sorts or something.
I'm no agent of anybody, by the way. I'm an equal opportunity complainer. I've not liked any of our modern presidents. I've not liked American foreign policy for decades. I'm not partisan. I have no personal stakes in this other than to try to analyze as clearly as possible, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Equal opportunity complainer. All right, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for speaking to me on Hindustan Times.
Great to be with you. Thank you.